everyone, welcome to the Dyl Pickle Movie Network. I am Dylan Randazzo. It has been a couple of months since I've reviewed a full, film review on this channel, with just myself addressing you, the camera, the audience, the viewers and listeners out there. And it has been just because my life has gotten very busy. It's gotten in the way, and I have other things I have to tend to where I prioritized, a lot of my other shows over doing movie reviews. But when you see a movie that just immediately gets you so excited to talk about cinema and praise cinema and just appreciate the art form of cinema, it was one of those no-brainer moments where I left the theater and I said, I have to make a review for this. I don't care if I work in a few hours and I have to stay up all night editing this thing. A movie like this can exceed all dilemmas and just kind of pave this tunnel for me to see through the light. I don't really know how to make words right now. Challengers came out. It was my most anticipated movie of the year next to the movie I'm in this year. So technically my number 2 most anticipated movie of the year. And I had high expectations. I had a lot of hope riding on this film that it would be great, because this is a film that was supposed to come out, I believe, last August, and then was delayed a whole year due to the strikes. I mean, the strikes hit kind of right before Challengers was gonna come out. So we've been waiting now almost 2 years for this film, since it's been announced, since that first trailer came out. Obviously, that great Rihanna needle drop in that trailer had everyone so excited. Everyone really knows the premise of it. It's pretty clear to see when you watch the trailer. It is a love triangle told through these 3 tennis players. Zendaya being the one who's kind of at the center of this triangle, but also these 2 guys who are kind of vying for her affections. But what I think the trailer doesn't even capture totally is the relationship between the 2 guys, which I think is really, really integral to the success of this film. I was a little worried going into it. I said, you know what? What if this isn't as good as I hoped it would be? Because the trailers were just so masterfully done. I really like Luca Guadagnino, but admittedly, his last few films haven't been as strong as Call Me By Your Name, which was my introduction to Luca Guadagnino. I thought Suspiria was very good, but not a film I really go back to a lot. And then just last year, or a year or 2 ago, Bones and All was a film that I could appreciate, but I didn't really like. I didn't really enjoy it very much, so I was a little worried just for him as well, wondering if I would like this film, because his films haven't been hitting as strong for me. But luckily, very quickly into the film were all my worries eased, because this is, without a doubt, my favorite film of the year so far. There's always potential for another film to kind of surpass it, but I think, we're at April, we're a third of the way through the year, and right now I don't think anything even comes close to the quality of Challengers, and there will be people out there who will challenge my opinion, and that's totally fine. So let me know in the comments if you liked it.
I want you to be my coach. I want you to be my coach.
To get into the specifics, like I said, it is a love triangle set amongst these tennis players, but really there's no love to be found. I mean, there's glimpses there where you show the characters caring for one another, but really there's a lot of hate in this film. There's a lot of animosity, a lot of regret, a lot of resentment, and I think that's kind of where this film kind of takes a different pivot than a lot of other classic films that, yes, even deal with like the erotic themes that something like Challengers does, but usually we see in a love triangle film there's like a rooting interest, and there's someone we're not necessarily rooting for, we're maybe rooting against, but we also see their point of view, but usually the person at the center is the person that we are 100% in their boat, in their camp, rooting for, and it's really just about trying to figure out which person that person belongs with best. It's the classic age-old formula. It's Bella with Jacob and Edward. Which one should she choose? And the audience is kind of skewed towards wanting Edward. There are some Jacob defenders out there. I don't want to get into that whole debate right now, but the interesting thing about Challengers is that each one of the triangle does something very despicable at one point or another in this film, and there are characters that keep making mistakes, whether it be cheating on the partner they're, committed to, or sneaking behind the back, or being manipulative, or just getting in the heads of them. I mean, this is a tennis film, this is a sports film, and like a lot of great sports films, there is that notion of competitiveness, but it's not about the sport, it's about the relationships. Or is it about the sport and the sports are kind of finding their way into these relationship dynamics, and I really love how this film makes it so that you cannot have one element without the other, the sports and the romance, or the sports and the lust, I should say, because there's, like I said, not a lot of love to be had, but it does go hand in hand. It works so well together in tandem, and the way this film kind of plays out is essentially a tennis match in and of itself. The way you kind of see Zendaya as the tennis ball kind of bouncing back and forth from man to man at different stages of her life. And the way the film is edited and shot, I wrote down the names of the editor and cinematographer because I had to bring them up. The cinematographer, Sayambu Muktiprum, who did Call Me By Your Name. He was Luca Guadagnino's cinematographer in Call Me By Your Name. And then the editor, Marco Costa. What they have brought to this film is a real great sense of the manic energy, but the also controlled and very pointed attentiveness that you would get from a tennis match. You know, this whole back and forth of every time the ball is spinning, things are moving a mile a minute, but then when that ball makes the contact with the racket and you see it just kind of forcefully go the other way. I mean, this film feels like watching a tennis match, and not in the way, though, where it feels berserk, you know, not where you're feeling like you're disjointed, where you feel like you can't keep up, but the film is told in a very non-linear way. We are going from time period to time period, back to when they first met, to where they are in the future, to back when there was a match in Georgia, back to the present in New York. You know, the film does kind of bounce back and forth, but like a tennis match with pros, it always feels controlled. It always feels like the ball was meant to go in a certain path, meant to direct toward the opponent in a very specific way, to where it never feels messy. It never feels aimless. It feels like something you would see in a Christopher Nolan movie, which is not a really good example considering they're very stylistically different in terms of the tone as well and what the story being told is, but in the way that they're able to control the layered, non-linear storytelling in this film. It's really masterful, to where there are moments where there are gaps left open that you kind of have to question, wait, what happened in between here and there? And then eventually the film brings you back to that point to address what you may have missed later. And there are times where things don't get addressed. I mean, the very inciting incident of the film when these two guys meet Zendaya's character, basically their whole deal is that whoever wins the next tennis match gets Zendaya's number. But we never see that tennis match. We, through other scenes, are able to figure out what happened in that tennis match, who got her number and who got the girl, but we never see that tennis match. And that tennis match is such an integral part of these characters' journey, but we, the audience, never see it. But the mastery of this film, and the reason why it works so well, is that we don't need to see it. We, as the audience, can fill in the blanks for ourselves. And that's what I love about Luca Guadagnino, too, is that when he's in the scene, he takes the time to really flesh it out and really have these really great, dramatic moments between characters, but he doesn't feel the need to necessarily dwell on the things that aren't necessarily important or don't necessarily need to be told right to the audience. He can let the audience be smart and figure things out for themselves, which I think is a real strength to challengers. It's kind of finding those little mysteries throughout, then filling in the solutions of those mysteries while also kind of seeing some of those solutions and mysteries kind of brought to light. And one other device that I really love about this film, that this film does really well, is that there are things that are dropped very early on in the film, little gags that might just come across as humorous and just like a fun little visual gag that ends up becoming one of the great climax, stick it to the audience, F you moments in the film. And if you've seen the film, you know exactly what I'm talking about. But it's like the Chekhov's gun thing of you introduce something very early on in the film, you don't address it for another 2 acts, and then at the very end, a moment happens where you're like, oh my god, that's like that moment that happened in the beginning of the film, and then it just kind of repaints the entire canvas of what we're working with here. And that's the power of Challengers. And that's why I want to rewatch Challengers, and I probably should have rewatched Challengers before just spitting all this verbiage at you, the viewer, but I just wanted to talk about this film so much because I love it so much. But it is one of those films that I think with each repeated viewing, I'm going to love more and more because I'm able to see all the little details, even the ones I couldn't get on first view. But the thing is, despite the non-linear storytelling, it is still very easy to grasp on the first view. It's easy to grasp from the trailer what's going on. I mean, it's very clear that there's very much some animosity, like I said, not just between Zendaya and these guys, but these guys themselves. And I have to bring up the guys, Josh O'Connor and Mike Faist are just giving two of the best performances of their careers, and they continue to be the standouts of every project they're in. I mean, Mike Faist was so good in West Side Story that people were wondering why he didn't even just play Tony, because a lot of people hated Ansel Elgort in that film. They were just wondering, they're like, they should have just made him Tony, because he's that charismatic, and Josh O'Connor as well. I mean, it's very clear, I think, by the third act, that we're meant to root for one over the other, but even though there is kind of more of a rooting interest and someone we see as more of the antagonist, we still understand why the antagonist is the way he is, and why we understand his motives. And there are also things that the protagonist does that we don't agree with either, and just how manipulative they can both be with one another. And now I'm being very vague because I think part of the fun of Challengers is to see ultimately who she ends up with, who she kind of goes back and forth with depending on which stage of their careers they're at. And I keep saying, you know, who she goes back and forth with as if it's all about the two guys, but the film does a good job in making Zendaya's character have her own arc as well, because she is someone who is so laser focused in her sport, and she kind of sees this romance as like this added bonus. She basically says, I don't need anyone to love me. Like, love does not matter to me.
He's not in love with you.
What makes you think I want someone to be in love with me?
Maybe there's some truth in that, maybe there's not, and that's something for the audience to kind of take for themselves and kind of interpret as they will. But I think it's really interesting to see how she responds, because as you see in the trailer, this is not a big spoiler, but she has an injury that kind of makes her an observer to these two guys' tennis careers rather than her own, and you start to see that resentment also creep in to her personal relationships, and you start to wonder what is exactly driving her motivations. Is it genuine love and lust for these guys, or is it the, you know, deprivation of her own ability to play tennis and to get the glory that these two guys have, or maybe the lack thereof, and just not being able to just have that experience in the first place due to that kind of early career-changing incident and injury. There's no supporting character. I mean, there's no lead character. They are all just an ensemble together, and I love that, where each character feels like it is their film, but you also feel like you can't have one character without the other two. It's one of those perfectly drawn out trio films. And I think a lot of people are going to be bringing up last year's Past Lives as a direct comparison point. A, because the screenwriter of this film, Justin Kuritsky's, actually is married to Celine Song. So I don't know what that says about their relationship. The fact that they both made love triangle movies back to back, and one is very much this kind of quiet, more pensive, more lovely little film, and the other one is this like kind of not mean-spirited, I guess mean-spirited, but very cynical, very like dirty and sweaty and sexy film. You know, they're very, very tonally different, but they are dealing with similar triangles in a way. One is very much more built on lust, one is built on genuine love and not necessarily knowing what they want to do because of that love. But something that's very interesting about Past Lives is that we are still seeing it mostly from Nora's perspective. She is kind of the focal point, whereas here, you would think Zendaya is the focal point, but we just get so much with Mike Faist and so much with Josh O'Connor that it just feels like all three of their films. It doesn't feel like there's a central person that we are seeing the film through, because like I said, there's times where each character makes mistakes and hiccups that pisses the audience off. There were moments where every single character I went, why are you doing that? You're such a scumbag. But I think that's what the power of this film is, because while we don't agree with their decisions, we see why, because of the writing here, they are justified in their opinions to do that and take those measures. It's just one of those films that is just so rich, so layered, so amazing. And like I said, the way it's filmed like a tennis match, and just the idea of it being a tennis match in and of itself, because tennis is two people. It's one person on one end, one on the other, gazing into each other's eyes for hours on end, dripping sweat, bouncing a ball back and forth, you know, kind of putting their all energy into it. It's a very erotic thing that I think we don't really necessarily know unless you played the sport. And I haven't played the sport, you know, I've tried and I'm absolutely terrible at it. But there is this kind of weird nature about tennis that is different than any other sport. You know, a lot of sports are team sports or individual sports, but even something like boxing, you're getting that direct contact of punching the crap out of one another. But with tennis, you're still at a distance. And I think that's what this film is. It's these characters at a distance from one another. And every time this major event in their life happens throughout their lives, they slowly grow apart. And with the growing apart, it's like an elastic, you know, kind of one of those real elastic bands that you use at like the gym, where every time they separate, the elastic just gets pulled further and further, and that tension is so real and grows more and more and more. The sexual tension in this film, I mean, is just insane. It's off the roof, but it really just aids to the character and the plot and everything going on. I love the Atticus Ross and Trent Reznor score. If you love Reznor and Ross from like The Social Network and most recently, you know, like the TMNT movie, they bring a lot of really interesting style to every musical score they compose, and this one especially, it kind of has this like kind of EDM poppy, like almost like you're in the club type feel, but then it also knows when to pull it back and when to just focus on the characters. And there was a whole stretch of this film, it's very late in the film, that is really absent of most dialogue. It's just characters reacting almost in slow motion. or it might quite literally be in slow motion. This is where I wish I had another viewing of this film, but, you know, like, you see the beads of sweat dripping off these people's faces, but it's all just facial expressions. It's all the movement of the eyes. It's looking over at the crowd and looking back at the opponents, you know, and there's very little dialogue to be had. And a lot of the storytelling comes from just the facial expressions of the actors, but also the way Trent Reznor and Atticus Ross accompany them with the score. It's just a film I could go on and on and on about. It's one of those films that I really want to sit down and almost let play through and just commentate. I mean, I guess that's a thing, commentary tracks, but I know I didn't make the film, but it's just one of those films that really inspires me to want to make a commentary track, because I feel like every single shot of this thing, every single frame, every single editing choice, and I know there are people going online and taking like that 2-minute clip that they posted in the marketing of Zendaya and Mike Faist having this argument in their hotel room, and they're dissecting it to all hell and saying, oh my god, there's like 123 cuts in this 1-2-minute scene. And I'm like, once you watch it in the context of the movie, it makes so much sense, especially because this is a tennis match. We're watching these characters kind of bounce the ball back and forth, and not just on the court. And that's the most important thing. It's in their lives, in their bedrooms. You know, you're seeing the ball bounce back and forth, and that is not a double entendre. Maybe it is, I don't know. But you're watching kind of this back and forth tennis match, and you don't necessarily want to take your eyes off of it. And that is what the editing conveys as well. There are quick cuts sometimes back and forth because it's supposed to emulate the tennis match. But then the cinematographer and editors are very conscious when to stop that and when to let it just breathe and sit and focus on the characters. It's such a good film, and I really highly recommend it. It is not a film to necessarily bring your kids to. If your small kids love Shake It Up and love Zendaya and love the Spider-Man films, maybe not the movie to bring them to. Also because Zendaya is not very nice in this film. None of these guys are very nice in this film. They have their moments, and that's the thing with this film. They're not all 100% wastes of people, but they do some very questionable things and very disagreeable things, but it is very explicit. I mean, there are nude parts to be seen, but again, it doesn't feel like it's just there for the sake of it. It feels like it has some sort of, you know, connection to the material. And I think that's one thing that, you know, people out there sometimes misunderstand about sex in film is that, oh, it's sex, it's just unnecessary. And a lot of the time, I feel like it is warranted because, you know, sex is something people do, and it's a way people, you know, kind of get their emotions out. And in this film especially, it's where they get a lot of their pent-up frustration out. You know, the acts of sex in this film, or the horniness of it, is kind of the subtext of what these characters are thinking and feeling, because they're not necessarily good at saying their words. There's a scene in the sauna with Mike Faist and Josh O'Connor where they are saying things, but not saying things, but saying things at the same time, if that makes sense.
I don't need to play mind games with you.
They're saying things without saying the words of them. And I think that's kind of one of the examples there where, like, the sexual tension and the sex and the, you know, the R rating is very necessary in telling this story in the most effective way, because that's how these characters cope with things. This is how they, you know, take out their frustrations and their energy and put their energy towards it. It's like any film about addiction. Is drinking and doing a lot of drugs bad? Yes, it is. But the films themselves are trying to use that as a way of us, the audience, understanding what these characters are going through. And some characters in films about addiction use those drugs and alcohol to escape their reality or to kind of funnel their energy and channel their energy. And that's what I think sex in film is meant to do as well, is meant to funnel that energy into some way, some kind of physical embodiment of something. So I that's just kind of my defense of sex in film. I mean, are there cases where it's unnecessary and it doesn't make any sense? I mean, ask Tommy Wiseau, probably. But for the most part, I think every filmmaker has an intention and an intent, and these characters have intent and intention, and I think in Challengers they definitely do. It's a very challenging film. It is. It's in the name, but I love it so much. It is my favorite film of the year, and I would be very surprised and very pleasantly surprised to see what may top it, because it is just one of the great films I've seen in years. So that is my review. Let me know if you've seen Challengers. Let me know in the comments below. I hope I kept it as spoiler-free as possible. Like I said, the trailer gives you a lot, but it's really about just kind of seeing the grand picture of it that makes it so spectacular and so amazing. So let me know down below, and let me know if you like tennis, because I never got the hype, but this film makes me want to, you know, kind of partake in the hype. I know my dad loves tennis, so Dad, if you're watching this is not a slight at you, but
Unfortunately, my only skill in life is hitting a ball with a racket.
it makes me want to watch more tennis. I don't know. It's just one of those great sports films as well. I need to stop talking or I'm going to keep talking for hours about it. But go watch Challengers. I'll probably talk about it a lot more on this channel as we get closer to Oscar season because I hope it's still in the conversation. It did come out very early in the year. But thank you for watching. Subscribe, like. We have a subathon 24-hour live stream coming up soon. So get ready. Get that coffee and caffeine ready to stay up with me 24 hours as I stream right here on this channel on May 4th at 12 p.m. noon. It's going to be very, very exciting. Eastern time. That's Eastern time. But otherwise, that's all for me now. Thank you so much. And let me know in the comments also what other movies from 2024 that I might not have reviewed yet that you want to see reviewed, because we have 24 hours of a live stream to get to, and I might want to fill some time with some reviews. So thank you so much for watching. Hope you check out Challengers this weekend, and have a good one. Stay safe.